Record to the cloud. Okay, great. So let's get to this week's class. Now that we did a review. It's very appropriate that I did the review and not recorded it, because anyone can just call Danny and get the, I think it's for like a week, we'll have the recordings available online. So what we're going to discuss tonight, this is what's going to be on the agenda for the next 6 weeks. We discuss the eternal soul within each person, and tonight it's all about reincarnation. So let's get to it. As we discussed earlier, the 13th principle of Maimonides was belief in resurrection of the dead. Now you got to remember that he was a scientist. He was Aristotelian logic oriented scientist, and yet he still believed in the supernatural concept of resurrection of the dead. What is resurrection of the dead? We'll discuss that on another week. But right now,
Indeed Instant Match instantly delivers quality candidates matching your job description. Visit Indeed.com/hire.
Okay, I'm going to mute that person. Okay, so moving right along, you got to remember, Chevra, whenever anything happens in your room, we hear it. Okay, let's talk about Gilgul. Gilgul means the wheels of the soul. Gilgul literally comes from the Hebrew word around or circle or something that's constantly turning. And as we mentioned earlier, directly from the book of Job, behold, these things does God do twice, even 3 times to a man, to bring his soul back from the pit, that he may be enlightened with the light of the living. By the way, this is what you see on the right is actually a cover page of the book of the Zohar. And you can see that actually after the invention of the Gutenberg press, one of the first books that Judaism actually surprisingly opted to print was the 1620. They had the Zohar was already in print, which is very strange because it had never been committed to writing, just because it wasn't supposed to be available to the masses. So as we discussed last week, why do you think this reference to reincarnation appeared in the book of Job? It's because people needed to understand how is it possible that bad things happen to good people. Why did Job's 10 children? It appears if God wanted to prove a point, so he killed 10 children. What a horrible idea. So understanding Gilgul, which we're going to hopefully be able to accomplish tonight, you'll understand that it's a much more complex concept. Reincarnation is not part of the process of Chiyat HaMetim, resurrection of the dead. Reincarnation is the re-entry of the soul into an entirely new body in the present world. Resurrection, by contrast, is reunification of the soul with the former body upon the arrival of the Messiah. The purpose of reincarnation is twofold: to make up for a failure in a previous life, to create a new higher state of personal perfection not previously attained. Where resurrection is to reward the body with its appointed soul along with all of other worthy souls at the time of the Mashiach. To make it more simple, resurrection is thus a time of reward. Reincarnation is a time of repairing. Very good. I like that. Now, this is just an example of the famous rabbis that were famous for their study and their conceptualization of the belief in reincarnation. Now, I'm not just talking about Chiyat HaMetim. Why is that different? Well, let me tell you that Maimonides initially said a number of things that were very unpopular at the time. The most unpopular one that he was noteworthy of, Maimonides said that when the temple would be rebuilt, he would not return to animal sacrifices. And the rabbinic world went crazy and they started burning his books. So he recanted. He sent out a letter recanting. No, I made a mistake. When the Mashiach comes and we do rebuild the Holy Temple, we will be sacrificing animals again. His son years later asked him, why did he recant?
It's not
because he changed his view. It's because he didn't want them to burn his books. That being said, we already mentioned that Rambam believes in life and the soul and that they are not necessarily finite. So these are other famous rabbis that you thought would be more Aristotelian, logic oriented. Instead, these are famous rabbis that emphasize the belief in reincarnation. Ramban, Nachmanides, Rabbeinu Bachya, Rabbi Levi Ibn Habib, Shlomo Alkabetz, spelling incorrect, Isaac Luria, the Ari, Chaim Vital, his student, Baal Shem Tov, the inheritor of the Chaim Vital's Hasidic tradition, mystical tradition. The Vilna Gaon is one of the big surprises. People think that he was a clinical, member of the Lithuanian intelligentsia. He believed in reincarnation. Achacham Yosef Chaim, known as the Ben Yishai, and these are more. Chacham Yosef Chaim lived in the early 1900s. Yehuda Ashlag in the late 1900s. The Baba Sali, I think, passed away at the age of 105. I think he passed away in the early 2000s. So my point is, this is Ashkenazi, Sfaradi, Litvish, Galiciana, medieval, all the way up to now, that reincarnation is a staple in the belief system of world historical Judaism. It's not specific to the Sfaradim, it's not specific to the Hasidim, it's a world historical trend in Judaism that we believe that there's a soul in each and every one of us, and upon the death of our physical bodies, the souls remain alive. Our souls remain sentient energy. So this is known as Sefer HaBahir. And what's really interesting is, if you look at this picture here, by the way, this was published in Vilna. I believe it was in 1853. And again, this is a really hardcore mystical work, and it was already available in Jewish bookstores in the 1850s. Okay, what is in the Sefer HaBahir? What is there a righteous person? Let's read it together. You can follow along with me. Why is there a righteous person to whom good things happen, while another righteous person has bad things happen to them? And by the way, you should know this is a classic theological question. Rasha v'tovlo, tzaddik v'ralo. Why do the evil people of the world prosper and righteous people suffer? This is because the righteous person did bad in a previous life and is now experiencing the consequences, question mark? What is this like? A person planted a vineyard and hoped to grow grapes, but instead, sour grapes grew. He saw that his planting and harvest were not successful, so he tore it out. He cleaned out the sour grapes and he planted again. When he saw that this planting was not successful, he tore it up and planted it again. This is Sefer HaBahir. Transmigration, which means the process of leaving a body, coming back into a body, leaving a body, may continue for 1,000 generations, according to Sefer HaBahir. But the common opinion in the Spanish traditions is that in order to atone for its sins, the soul transmigrates 3 more times after entering its original body. And that's, as you know, we've been quoting it all night long. That's according to Job, who said, 3 times with a man does God take a soul and place it into this world. However, the righteous transmigrate endlessly for the benefit of the universe, not for their own benefit. So we're going to actually learn tonight just a few examples of how the Talmud says our patriarchs were reincarnated, in that why were our patriarchs reincarnated? Because they sinned? No, because their souls were so powerful that if they were brought back into this world, they would be able to do righteous and great things. I want to take a break for a moment and see if there are any questions. Any questions so far? You can either go like this or you can electronically raise your hand. So we're all on the same page, correct? Okay. You know why we're all on the same page? I say it every class because I'm such a good teacher. Such a good teacher, you guys understand everything. Okay, let's get back to the text then. So there are many schools of mysticism. And I wanted to show you, this is known as Lurianic Kabbalah, or the Arizal. And his is the most prominent and popular form of Jewish mystical teachings. The idea of transmigration, follow along with me. By the way, do you know what the Arizal, what that meant? He was called the Ari, which literally means lion, but it's actually an abbreviation. Ashkenazi Rabbi Yitzchak. And why was he called Ashkenazi, Rabbi Yitzchak? Because he lived in Tzfat, which was about 90% Sfaradi. So he was such a unique thing, having an Ashkenazi grand rabbi, that he was known to, oh, he's the Ashkenazi Rabbi Yitzchak. Okay, so now you know where the origin of the name, the Ari, comes from. The idea of transmigration of a soul as a punishment was discussed throughout the Gaonic period. The Gaonic period was approximately 600 to about 1,000 of this common era. This included the concept that souls could be embedded into animals, plants, and even inorganic, inanimate matter. What? You can be embedded into a rock, into a plant? Yeah, that's Lurianic mysticism. It didn't become popular. It was discussed, but it didn't get accepted till well after the 15th century. Transmigration into the body of animals is first mentioned in Sefer HaTmunah, which is originated with the Kabbalists of Girona, Spain. Now, I have to tell you, when you read when you study a lot of mysticism, you'll find that, yes, it's true, that the Sephardi Rabbanim were disproportionately represented in the great mystics. It's not that the Ashkenazi rabbis didn't study or accept Jewish mysticism. It's just that the Ashkenazi community, were motivated to keep things a lot more hush-hush. You have to understand that in the 1400s in North Africa, the Arab world was extremely open to Judaism. It was known as the golden age of Spanish Jewry. Rambam, Nachmanides, Maimonides, Gersonides, Ibn Ezra, the Ibn Shabrut, the Ibn Nagdala, the Ibn Ezra, I think I mentioned them, that all these great rabbis lived under Moor or Muslim Spain and Muslim North Africa. So there was no fear of studying Kabbalah. There was no reason that you had to keep it hush-hush. In fact, there's a lot of Muslim mysticism that seems to overlap Jewish mysticism. However, in Christendom, whenever mystical traditions of ours got out, it was deemed to be anti-Jesus, anti-Christian, anti-church, and that it was a reason for rabbis and their students to be put to death. So don't think that just because the Kabbalists of Girona, Spain were extremely prolific, that Ashkenazi rabbis weren't. It's just that we did not promulgate it nearly as much as the Sephardi communities of North Africa and Spain. So in Sha'ar HaGilgulim, attributed to the Arizal, Sha'ar HaGilgulim means the gates of reincarnation. That's the best translation I can think of. His foremost disciple, Rabbi Chaim Vital, and his son, Rabbi Shmuel Vital, further expounded the traditions of Gilgul, of reincarnation. Adam had the first and the most primordial universal soul, Neshama Klali, the universal soul, that included all the souls of everything created. After he ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, his soul fragmented into thousands and thousands of sparks, fragments and fragments of fragments, which subsequently became clothed and incarnated into every single human being that was ever born and is alive now. Since all souls are part of the original form, they can reunite and separate at will or at need. Now, although the Arizal and the Vital father and sons, also often referred to as the sparks of the neshama, to better understand this allegorically, I recommend you think of souls as drops of water. Because when you put a drop of water next to another drop of water, they can unite into a bigger, stronger drop. The more drops you add, pretty soon you have a puddle. You have right? But when you put fire next to fire, that allegory isn't as strong. The real idea that Arizal wanted to explain is that energy is universal. The soul energy is universal. And that when we are no longer constricted to a physical body, there's no boundaries, there's no plastic bubble to keep the air in the balloon. So as soon as the balloon breaks, the air is reunited with the rest of the air, so to speak, or the water is reunited with the rest of the water. So I see there is a hand up in the chat room. Two questions from Steve. Not sure which Steve it is because it doesn't say, but what about beloved pets? Are they reincarnated or could they have the soul of a former person? Also, what about all the animals that were sacrificed? Are they reincarnated? Also, does the soul always stay with Jewish bodies in reincarnation? Can a former non-Jewish soul be reincarnated into a Jewish body? And the answer is yes, yes, and yes. And hopefully I'll have time to, I'll tell you what I will do. So class will hopefully I'll be able to take a break one more time at 7:40 and maybe even 7:35, and I'll give 10 minutes for questions. Those are great questions, and I hope you're able to answer them. So let's continue. Or Chaim HaKodesh, Rabbeinu Chaim ben Attar, also Sephardi, by the way. The initial generations after Adam lived hundreds of years. As generations, lifespans diminished, they had less time to correct sins and mistakes of their lives. Makes a lot of sense. Think about it. Adam lived to the age of 930 years. What did you do after the first 100 years? And the answer is he had close to 800 years to fix his mistake of eating the forbidden fruit. You know? Cover, I got to remind you, you got to hear everything. So let me just mute someone real quickly. So the idea is, look in the Torah. Avraham Avinu lived to 175. Yitzchak lived to 180. But then you get to Moshe, he only lived to 120. Wait a minute, King David only lived to the age of 70. So compare Adam, 930, to King David, 70. David had a lot less time to do tshuva or make amends for his mistakes. Well, if you didn't make amends because your life was shorter in this world, that was one of the reasons why reincarnation was not discussed initially in the Torah, but much later as people's lives were diminished, the concept of reincarnation became more prolific in the mystical traditions. We have mentioned the principle that everything contains a power that enlivens it. And a human being, this power is truly godly, and it's called the neshama. So many years ago, although primarily I wrote it for high school kids, I have a lecture on the Jewish influences on Star Wars. Everyone, I'm sure, have seen Star Wars. It's one of the most successful movie franchises of history. I think it's the combined income from the movies and merchandising is close to $2.5 billion. So the whole idea is that you'd be surprised that there was a concept in the Star Wars series is the Force. What's the Force? The Force is an energy that permeates everything physical and material. And it's sort of like the energy that permeates the universe and holds the universe together, which is a perfect explanation of what God is. God is in everything. God's energy, I should say, is in everything. And it's God's energy that holds everything together. And if you think that that is too mystical, you should know that that is exactly what Albert Einstein was working on when he died. He called it the unified field theory. He believed that there was an energy that permeated everything in the entire universe, non-physical, non-explainable, but that it was there and that it could be, eventually he was writing a formula to prove that there is an energy in the entire universe that holds everything together. It's called the unified field theory. Animals, and this is the question that Steve asked. And again, Steve, I'm not sure which Steve you are because there's so many Steves in our community and there's no last name on your ID. But regardless, right here, we have mentioned the principle that everything contains a power that enlivens it. In a human being, the power is truly godly. It's called the neshama. Animals as well have a soul. It's called nefesh. Nefesh habehamit, the animal soul. Plants and other growing things have a vegetative soul. Huh? What? Yep. Lurianic mysticism explains that spiritual energy, that is God, permeates and is in everything. Inert matter also contains a portion of that power called nefesh. Now, you think that you always make fun of people who say, speaking kindly to excuse me, what happened there? Speak kindly to plants helps them grow. Imagine what speaking kindly to human beings can do. When I saw this months ago, I cut it and pasted it and prepared it for this lecture I knew I would be giving. That is exactly one of the most important Jewish concepts. That if we acknowledge that even inside plants, there's a mystical energy from God, if you want to call it the nefesh, whatever you want to call it, right? That if we have to be conscious that plants have a nefesh, then can you imagine how much more so we have to be sensitive and thoughtful to human beings. You know why we cover a challah on Friday night? We cover a challah on Friday night while we make kiddush. So we don't embarrass the challah that we're making a blessing on the kiddush first. So we cover it so it doesn't see, so we don't hurt its feelings. Why do we do such immature, childish attitude? Well, it's a constant reminder. If we have to be careful not to insult a challah, how much more so do we have to be careful not to hurt a human being's feelings? So what do you learn from this? That we have a soul, and the soul is even in, and this is one of Steve's questions, what's a soul being there? What is a soul doing in these essence? And how does this relate to reincarnation? And hopefully we'll get to that momentarily. Chevra, please don't send me a text message. Please use our chat group on the bottom. I don't have time to grab my phone and look at it. So, reincarnation in the Torah. Aha. When the Jewish people worship the golden calf, God tells Moshe he is so angry with the nation that he plans to destroy them and start all over again with Moses. This is from the book of Exodus. Moshe prays to save the Jewish people and to forgive them. And he says to God, this people has committed a grievous sin and made themselves a god of gold. And now if you would but forgive their sin, but if not, erase me, machenina, from your book that you have written. Machenina means erase me. How would being erased from the Torah help the Jewish people or Moshe? The Midrasho Shel Shem explains, this is based on the concept of reincarnation. Moshe was a Gilgul of Noach. Noach failed to pray on behalf of his generation for them to be saved from the great flood. He therefore came back as Moshe in order to rectify his earlier failure, because he failed to pray to Moshe, praying for the Jewish people when they're in danger of being annihilated. So let me remind you, I see there's an English typos and stuff like that in that paragraph, so forgive me. Let me make sure you understand. God calls to Noah and says, Noah, make me an ark 300 cubits by 50 cubits by 30 cubits, make it out of gopher wood. I'm going to destroy the entire world by a flood. And what does Noah basically say? Okay. On the other hand, the rabbis fault him. You know, when God came to Abraham 10 generations later and said, I'm going to just destroy the 5 towns of the evil people. Abraham argues and he pleads. What happens if there are 50 people, 40 people, 30 people, 20, 10? He's arguing God, trying to save even the guilty people. So the rabbis faulted Noah that he failed to pray for the people. When Moshe Rabbeinu says to God, Machenina, if please God, forgive them. Please God, I don't want you to destroy them, right? Because he said, I'll save you and only you. Isn't that what God did with Noah? He destroyed the entire world and saved Noah. And God said, I'll destroy all the children of Israel. I'll just keep you alive and you'll be the first, like Noah, start over. So here's the last thing. The Kabbalists explain that the Hebrew words machenina, erase me, contain the exact same letters, but in different order as the words me Noach ani, which means Noach ani, which means I am from Noah. That's what machenina, the same exact letters rearranged, that I am Noah. Moses was thus saying to God that he had saved the Jewish people, for if not, then Moshe's entire return to this world would be for naught, and his name might as well be erased. So now you're getting a lot of insight into what the whole purpose of the incarnation. We missed the mark in a previous life, and you come back into this world to correct a wrong or to fill one particular mitzvah that you missed in a previous life. I see a hand up in the chat room. So the Kreutzers asked, do evil people have an evil neshama? Haman, Hitler, etc. What happens? So the answer is very specific. A neshama cannot be evil because we all have bechira chofshi. We all have free will. So I'm going to tell you specifically. No one can say, in Judaism, by the way, everyone's born perfect. In Christianity, I don't want to sound like I'm being critical of Christian philosophy, but Judeo-Christian ethic. There are a lot of similarities, perhaps, but
Will happen this particular crime. Tyler.
I have to mute that family. Okay, so to be specific, you have to understand that there might be a Judeo-Christian ethic, but philosophically speaking, we're not the same. Because in Christianity, a person is born in sin. It's called original sin. That sex is a sin, and therefore any product of a sinful union between a husband and a wife, even if they are right, is a sin, and therefore original sin. Everyone's born in sin, and you have to prove yourself worthy through baptism and accepting of Jesus. Now in Judaism, it's just the opposite. You're not born with your cup half empty or completely empty. In Judaism, every soul is perfect. Every soul is perfect. So what does that mean? You're born with the capacity to go immediately into a perfect realm. Now, by the way, likewise, you should know that everyone has free choice. I've shared this story, and I have to tell you, it does relate to Gilgal and understanding the concept of free choice and why a soul is brought into this world. I had a friend growing up. We're still friendly, but he lives in Israel. I haven't seen him in a while. When we were growing up, if we knew then what we know now, we would have had his father arrested. His mother would periodically appear in public. Well, not really in public, but we would see her and she'd have a black eye. And she always had what we now know is that class, I opened up a cabinet and a can of peas hit me in the face. The father used to beat them. And I was actually witness. Now, don't get me wrong. I used to get, patched in the tush. I was a real troublemaker. And my father was a disciplinarian. And looking back, I thank my father. I was a bissel wild. I was a pretty wild kid. My father kept me in line. But the whole point is that I once was with this young man. We were at Passover vacation. We went to the beach. His father told him to be back at a particular time. We were like 5 minutes late. We all walked in, and the father beat the bejeebies out of him for being 5 minutes late. And I mean closed fist, hitting him in the face. And this was an Orthodox family. The point, though, is that years later, I was visiting him and in Israel. I hadn't seen him for a long time. He has many children. I think he ended up getting, when I was there, he had like 7 kids. Now I think he's 11 kids, whatever. So what happened was he used to really get it all the time from his father. His father used to, I'm not talking about pach in the tuchas. I'm not talking a belt. I'm talking his father used to close the fist on him. And what happened was his little boy was playing, and he said to him, Menachem, stop that, you're gonna break it. Menachem, stop it now. And the little kid was playing around, guess what? He broke what he wasn't supposed to be touching. And what happened was the whole room went quiet, and my friend turned to this 6 or 7-year-old, goes, actually he was younger, he said, Menachem, come over here. And I go, uh-oh, here it comes. He's gonna punch him just like his father. And instead, my friend turned to him and said, Menachem, what did I say to you? And the little boy goes, you told me not to do that. He goes, and did you do? Yes, I did it. What do you do now? He goes, I'm sorry, Abba, I shouldn't have done that. And he goes, and I'm gonna go sit in the corner for 5 minutes and think about what I did. He didn't hit him, he didn't punch him. Why? Because we have bechira chofshi, we have free choice. And I discussed this with him. So my father taught me how to be a father. Everything my father did, I do just the opposite. And you want to know something? He turned a negative into a very strong positive. And he attributes to his father, my father taught me a negative lesson, but I still learned a lesson from my father. So that's the idea of Gilgul. You know what? There's something to that. Okay, there's more questions. How about if I keep the questions for a few minutes because it's already 7:25. If you notice, I'm talking fast because, maybe I should slow down because I wanted to do this in 9 weeks. I guess it'll be all right if we do it in 12 weeks. So I can take a deep breath and another sip of coffee. Hold on.
That sounds good.
Okay, I'll slow down. And maybe I'll answer the questions.
Rabbi,
There's no rush. Hold on a second. I recognize that voice, but just give me a second because there are quite a few questions here. Didn't the Rambam say that some souls are born with an inclination to evil and those souls needed to work harder to do good? So personalities are maintained in the neshama, but there's still free will. You still have free will. And just because you have an inclination doesn't mean that you can't overcome it. So one of the most famous rabbis of the last 100 years, I think, one of the top 10, was Rabbi Avram Twersky. If you don't know him as Rabbi Avram Twersky, maybe you know him as Dr. Avram Twersky. He was a Hasidic Lubavitch rabbi who also was an MD, who was also the chief of psychiatry at the University of Pennsylvania in Pittsburgh, and later became chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at the most prominent hospital in Pittsburgh. And he developed a whole concept. It's similar to AA, but on drug addiction. And the first thing is, like, he basically said, I don't care if you have a gene that gives you a propensity towards addiction. I don't care if you have a gene that gives you a propensity towards abuse or physical violence. You have the choice to say no. It's free choice. And I agree with it. Now you have to work on it. But even if you have that proclivity, doesn't mean you have to act on it. So, for example, I know there are a number of doctors listening here tonight. They'll tell you that, nanogram for nanogram, the most powerful hormone in the human body is testosterone. So here's the whole thing. Just because a man has overactive testosterone doesn't mean that he's allowed to be violent or sexually aggressive. I'm sorry. No, you can't. And you can't touch women inappropriately, or you can't act it. No. But I have too much testosterone. Too bad. Judaism says, too bad. You have to overcome it. Just wondering if you can give some perspective on Jewish suffering and reincarnation. So, for example, were the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust potentially reincarnated? Or all those murdered in the Inquisition or throughout Jewish history? Should we feel any better knowing that they were reincarnated? So there are a lot of people that find comfort in understanding that reincarnation is one of the explanations for the death of innocent or young people. You also have to understand Olamo Kedarko Noheg. It says it numerous places in Jewish philosophy, in the Talmud, etc., which means the world was created according to the laws of science, which means you cannot, you know what, I'm gonna stop the share for just a minute. It's a very important concept. You cannot stand on the train tracks knowing that a train is coming and say, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher, God, please save me. No, get off the damn train tracks. Why? Because we're talking physics. Don't pray to God to save you from the oncoming train. Get off the train tracks. What, you're asking God to stop the whole laws of physics so that you don't have to get off the train tracks? You want to be teleported up, to the Starship Enterprise? That's not going to happen. Olamo kedarko noheg. God created the world with the laws of physics, and no matter how much you pray, okay, you have to get off the train tracks. Now, why is this relative? Because God created also a world where there is free choice for good and for bad. And it does relate to the concept of reincarnation. Why? So, for example, you have free choice. So let's say I go out, tomorrow night is my granddaughter's birthday, and I have a couple of drinks. Okay. And I drink too much. My blood alcohol is not 0.18, it's 0.2. I'm plastered. And I have choice. I know I'm drunk, right? I know I can't stand up, but it's only 6 blocks to my house. I can do it. I'll be okay. And I get into my car. And if I'm lucky, I only crash my car into a wall and I only hurt myself. But unfortunately, that's not the way it often happens. What often happens is a drunk gets into their car and kills somebody else because they had b'chira chofshit, they had free choice. And because of God giving them free choice, they made the wrong choice and an innocent person suffered. So how does that relate to the Holocaust? Hitler had free choice. He could have been a good person. He chose to be an evil person. Now, does that mean all those 6 million were reincarnated? Not necessarily, but I will tell you that 1.5 million children were murdered. And a lot of people find solace in understanding the concept of reincarnation. You know, the Loshana Rebbe lost his 10 children in the Holocaust. And he came to America, he remarried, and I think he had 2 more children as a middle-aged man. And he never blamed Hashem. And he, of course, can you imagine losing 10 children? They often compared him as the 20th century Job, who also lost 10 children. My point to you is that Olamo Kedarko Noheg, which means there are bad people in the world. God's world has the concept of free choice. Because if there wasn't free choice, you could neither be punished nor rewarded for making the right choice. So, you know, I will tell you, and we are going to discuss it in one of my slides, but I think there's still a question I should answer. Let me just get to it. Chat. So that, I think that gives you an insight into, was every person who was killed in the Holocaust reincarnated? Was everyone that died in the Inquisition? You know, by the way, I want to make sure everyone knows that when I was teaching high school and getting my master's in Jewish history, I used to play a game with my high school students. And you know, on Passover, it says, B'chol dor v'dor amdim aleinu l'chalotenu, which literally means in every generation, they've tried to kill us. Every generation, B'chol dor v'dor. Amdu aleinu l'chalotenu v'akadosh baruch hu matzilenu me'yadam. But the Holy One, blessed be He, saved us from their hands. So I used to play this game with my students. I would say it to them, pick any date in the last 2,000 years, and within 40 years, or one generation, I will be able to name for you a Jewish Holocaust. Everyone knows, you know, the 6 million, and everyone knows the Inquisition, everyone knows the Crusades, and everyone knows how bad the Crusades were. You know, you think the Crusades were bad? Oh boy, for the Jews, it's horrible. But how about 1640 to 1648? The Chelmeniki revolution in the Ukraine. You know, Bogdan Chelmeniki, if you go to Kiev, there's a 25-foot statue of him because he's like the George Washington of Ukraine. But the Jewish, and they'll never take it down. It's not like removing, you know, Christopher Columbus, okay, which all over America, they're ripping down his statues. Bogdan Chelmeniki, his statue will never be taken down in the Ukraine. However, you should know that it is estimated that he killed a minimum of 250,000 Jews and a maximum of 400,000 Jews. And you got to remember, in 1640, think pilgrims. There were no machine guns. There were very few guns. They did it all by saber and by baseball bat, so to speak. Okay, and that was not all over Europe. That was only in southern Ukraine. So when you ask about the death of throughout generations, you're asking the very good questions about Punishment, reincarnation, is it a punishment? So Judaism, so the problem with thinking that those who died were reincarnated, then it would be like they were brought back into this world to be punished with death. There's only one problem. They were already punished with death. They already died. Judaism doesn't believe reincarnation is a punishment. Remember what we studied in the second slide? Reincarnation is to fix something. You know, it's a choice to come back, like Moshe Rabbeinu. Noah, I screwed up. I didn't pray for the people. I want to come back so I can pray for people that are doomed to death. I want to fix how I failed in a previous life. Okay, so I'll remind everyone, and I know we have some new, I see your hand, Sarita. So I'll give you, I'll remind everyone, I taught, I believe last week in the introduction, and it's actually one of the slides, but in case we don't get to it, I wanted to make sure you studied it today. There's actually applied, usually Kabbalah and Zohar and all the mystical texts, they're allegorical, and seldom does it affect Jewish law. But there is an interesting Jewish law that is affected by the concept of the supernatural, spirituality, and reincarnation. And that is, if a baby boy dies before his circumcision, the moil is called, there's no minyan, there's no fanfare, in the privacy of the hospital or the Chevra Kadisha room or at the funeral chapel, the moil comes and he performs the circumcision on the baby. No bracha, no ritual, no chair of Elijah, no certificate, but the baby's circumcised. And then the baby's buried. And the rabbis, one of the traditions, it's one of the few times where Jewish mysticism has affected Jewish tradition. So why is that? What happens if that baby grew up in the former Soviet Union, where there were times when it was illegal to be circumcised? It was illegal. And in fact, in case you weren't aware, there was a night, Stalin, I think it was in 1952, it was called the Night of the Murdered Poets. And in one night, 25,000 Jewish leaders were put to death in one night. It was like a silent pogrom. So rabbis, moyals, teachers, Talmudists, Roshei yeshivas, and poets and journalists were all killed in one night. So why is it called the Night of the Murdered Poets? Because the poets were famous. They were published. Everyone knew who they were. I mean, for example, do you guys know Rabbi Selmar? What, you never heard of Rabbi Selmar? He's the moil. Okay, you all know, Rabbi Howard Seif, Seif the knife, but how many of you know Rabbi Selmar? All right, how about Rabbi Rothstein? Oh, you don't know Rabbi Roth? He's another moil. You don't know all the moils, but you know all the poets because they're published. So the whole point is that there was a whole era in the Soviet Union where a whole generation of Jewish men were not circumcised. So what happens if you were a very pious Jew, you kept kosher, you observed Pesach in the Soviet Union, oh my gosh, you fasted on Yom Kippur, you kept kosher, but there's one mitzvah you were unable to fulfill because you were born in the former Soviet Union, you died in the former Soviet Union, you weren't circumcised. But what happened if you were a hemophiliac? So the halacha is, if one of your sons dies from hemophilia and you have a second son, you're not allowed to circumcise them. Now, if one son died from hemophilia, from bleeding, you're not allowed to endanger your second son you're not allowed to perform a mitzvah and endanger their life. So what happens if the person lived a full life but never was circumcised? So what happens is when they die, they stand before HaKadosh Baruch Hu and they say, please God, I want to do that one mitzvah. What's more important than Brit Milah? It's so important. I want to come back. So he's brought into this world, but he's not supposed to live a full life. How long is he supposed to live? Long enough in this world to be circumcised. So what happens is when the moil circumcises a child that has passed away, guess what? That soul has now fulfilled the mitzvah. Yes, there wasn't a bracha, but that body, that physical vessel known as a body, is circumcised. And that neshama has experienced the spiritual elevation of the ritual of circumcision. So by doing so, you now release that body. and that body is fulfilled, the physical body and that soul, that unity has fulfilled the mitzvah. So now how does this relate to the Holocaust, to the Inquisition, to the Crusades, to the Hellenic Revolution, to all the eras of horrible historical murder of Jews? Yes. Want to know something? Believing in reincarnation has helped us understand. But that doesn't let them off the hook. My problem with teaching too much about reincarnation and victimhood is that, oh, Hitler, of course, he had to kill 6 million Jews because they were previously reincarnated and they wanted to suffer for Al Kiddush Hashem and blah, 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 and that's why they had to die. So Hitler actually did them a favor. No, sorry. By the way, people say when I teach Holocaust studies and when I take people on the March of the Living, one of the most frequent questions that the students would ask is, why did God allow the death of 6 million Jews? So I go, you know what, 4.5 million, that's a good question. But the best question is, why did 1.5 million children die? And the answer is, the God I believe in, I'm telling you the truth, the God that Elliot Pearlson believes in doesn't kill 1.5 million children to prove a point. Now, on the other hand, I have to tell you that there are evil people in this world. Do you guys remember Ted Bundy?
Mm-hmm.
He killed 23 girls. There are sick people in this world. Okay? And don't tell me that because the girls were reincarnated from a previous life, no, they're evil people in the world. And what happens is if you start using that excuse or that explanation, then it alleviates the guilt of the perpetrators. So I encourage you not to think that way.
Question.
Yes, Ahuba.
Question. If we choose if we want to return or not, can we also choose what do we want to return as?
No, because sometimes it's what's called a tikkun. And to fix something, the fixing is up to the process that your soul defined by the needs of your soul. So, I didn't give enough tzedakah, I was poor, and now that I'm dead, I want to come back as Bill Gates' son. No, you don't get to come back as Bill Gates' son just because you want to give tzedakah. No, you don't get to choose who you want to come back as. No.
But like when people say, oh, I'd love to come back as your dog because you treat your dog so well, that's what I mean. I didn't mean like somebody like.
There used to be a comedian, and he was really hysterical. He said, if aliens ever landed from another civilization in the cosmos, and they just watched us for 24 hours, they'd have no idea who was the master and who was the dog. Because what do? The dog barks at the door and we jump up and we let him out. And then he pulls us all over town. And when he goes to the bathroom, we pick it up. Who's the master? The way the comedian expressed it, it's not a bad thing. But if you're going to come back as a dog, you might as well come back as a cat. Sit around, eat, don't do anything, ignore everyone. I'd come back as a cat. Okay, so let's do, we have one more minute. All right, great. So we have another question. Sarita.
Rabbi, on what do rabbis base the idea that Moses is a reincarnation of Noah? Where is that?
So if you remember, it says Machenina. So let's go back. Noah acknowledges at the age of 650 when he dies, I screwed up. You told me you were going to destroy the world. And I said, okay, let me build the ark. I did not fight. I did not argue. I did not pray. I didn't do enough to save the world. And I feel horrible. So God, okay, fine. You're going to come back as Moshe Rabbeinu. When Moshe Rabbeinu is in the same exact situation, God says, I'm going to kill all of Israel for worshiping the golden calf. I'm going to kill them all. Sound familiar? I'm going to kill the whole world, he said to Noah. Here he's saying, I'm going to kill all of Israel, but I'm going to keep you alive. Isn't that exactly what God said to Noah? I'm going to kill the whole world, but you, I'm going to keep alive. And so Moshe Rabbeinu says, Macheni na. If that's what you're going to do, erase me. And Moshe Rabbeinu fights and argues with God. And God says, okay, I won't kill them all. Now the words Macheni na literally also the same exact letters, not the gematria, same exact letters spell Noach Ani or Ani Noach, I am Noah. And what happened was Noach's previous life, he failed to pray for everyone else when told that he would be the only one to survive. So he came back as Moshe. So when Moshe was told everyone was going to be killed and only he would be saved, he did the opposite of Noah. He prayed that everyone should be saved.
Rabbi, but I'm sorry, but then that interpretation is done by the rabbis. It's not written anywhere or said anywhere in the Torah that he was his reincarnation. Is not saying it. It's something that people are deducing out of this word and that word.
Right. That's what Kabbalah is. Kabbalah is the hidden secrets of the Torah. If it was open, it wouldn't be secret. If it wouldn't be secret, it wouldn't be Kabbalah. By definition, Kabbalah means the mystical, the unknown, the unrevealed. Yes, Aida.
Rabbi, if the person dies violently, does the soul come back pure? Or does the soul come back with a sense of revenge?
So,
Did you understand? Did I explain myself?
yeah, it's a very
Yeah.
deep question. So let's take it step by step. There is a very prevalent rabbinic tradition that suffering causes a person to reevaluate their actions. And I cannot begin to tell you how many times a person in pain, I'm not talking about on their deathbed, a person in pain say to me, Rabbi, why is God punishing me? Why am I in so much pain? So my answer is, I don't know why. Do you know why? How should I know what you do behind closed doors? You have to. So sometimes when a person dies a tragic or painful death, it might be during that process, it forces them to, oh, I know why I'm getting this. That's the first process. Second answer to your question, and maybe I should do a little disclaimer. This is Rabbi Perlson after years of studying this particular subject. This is what I understand. You know, if you've heard of Lurianic mysticism, Arizal mysticism, you've heard of Zoharic mysticism, you've heard of Chabad mysticism. This is Perlson mysticism. The Perlson Taich, the Perlson insight. When we come back, we're pure. A soul is incapable of being dirty. A child is incapable of sin. A child, and that's what you're talking about, you're reborn. The process of rebirth literally means rebirth, a new choice, a new chance, a new beginning. Okay? So children are incapable of sin. Children, by the way, if you study applied halacha, you know children don't have to do mitzvah. Does a 5-year-old have to fast on Yom Kippur? No. You know who else doesn't have to fast on Yom Kippur? Shoteh cheresh v'katan. That means a person who's small, a minor, person who is diminished ability to learn because back then they didn't have sign language. And the most important one is a person who has diminished capacity, mentally or developmentally challenged. You know what they all have in common? Incapacity to express guile, hatred, or animosity. Have you ever known someone with Down syndrome? Amazing how full of love they are. All they want to do is hug and kiss and love. They don't understand guile. That's why you have to be so careful and never let them alone with bad adults. That's why you have to be really careful, because a bad adult, why? Because especially Down syndrome, They have only the capacity to love. And that's what you also see with children. If you put a black child, a brown child, a white child, a Jewish child, you put them all in the same room, at a week old, and you raise them together, they will honestly think that they're all brothers and sisters. They'll never learn, racism, because children do not have that capacity. It's only learned, or let me rephrase that, it's only taught to them by society and their parents. So I hope I answered your question, Aida.
No, wait, but that means that then if you.
I'm not a great teacher. What?
Wait, because what you're saying makes me, continue with the train of thought, which means that then if you die violently, then the body suffers, but not the soul, and you come back pure.
The body and the soul in this life are intertwined. They're braided.
Okay.
They're the one and the same.
So
Whatever.
the soul gets hurt also.
Of course. That forces the soul to think, what did I do? Like I explained to you, it's not the physical body that says to me, Rabbi, what did I do to deserve this? It's not the body that's asking me. It's the person's neshama that's asking me. It's the person's intelligence, their cognizance, their neshama, their nefesh, their ruach. That's what's asking. That's what's thinking. What did I do?
Okay, so then the soul says, okay, I'm coming back. Let me start all over again. I'm clean and pure. Is that it?
But let me remind you something that's very, very important.
It's gonna count to
One of the problems of Western civilization is they equate a long life with a meaningful life. Do you know how many people I know who lived to the age of 95, 100, and were absolutely garnished? Do you know how many people I know who died at 20, at 30, at 40? I gave the example last week of Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. You guys know Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan? He wrote something like 123 books. And I'm talking books. I'm not talking pamphlets. Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan wrote The Living Torah. He wrote books on mysticism, on Jewish texts. Unbelievable. One of the most prolific writers of the last 50 years. And he died, Nishtugna, really sad. So if I told you he wrote just now 123 books, how old do you think he was when he died?
It was very young, unfortunately.
He was 47. How could a person live 47 years and write so prolifically? And the answer is, because he wasn't chronologically 47. Chronologically, it was like 105. I mean, chronologically, it was 47. Spiritually, it was 105. A lot of people say, oh, they didn't live a level. Listen, I use this example a lot because it was such an epiphany to me. So a number of years ago, it wasn't Michael Blasberg. It was his father, Larry Blasberg, the funeral director. About 25 years ago, he calls me up. And because I told the story, it was Michael Blasberg. And I asked Michael, no, that was my father. So Larry Blasberg calls me up and he goes, hey, Rabbi, on the corner of 74th Street in Carlisle, like a block away, a person died. You want to do the funeral? So I go, sure, a neighbor? Yeah, of course I'll do it. So he goes, there's only one living relative. He's a nephew in New York. So I call the nephew in New York. And the nephew, oh, by the way, the deceased was like 95 years old. So I called the nephew in New York and I said, can you tell me something about your uncle? He goes, well, not really. What do you mean, not really? Well, he retired from the Postal Service at the age of like 45 and he moved to Miami. So did you ever visit him? He goes, no, I'm not exactly healthy myself, but I called him like once a year for Rosh Hashanah. Well, did he have any hobbies? I don't think so. Did he go to school? No, he got out of the army in 45 and he was a postal worker for like 20 years. And he retired. Well, anything about, no, I really don't know. Sorry, Rabbi, just a nice guy, just don't know anything about him. So I got to write a eulogy. I mean, there'll be people there, right? So there'll be people who come to a neighbor's funeral. So I go to the apartment building. It was right there on the corner of 74th and Carlisle. And I explained to the apartment manager, could you tell me something about I really didn't know him. I mean, he paid his rent and he's lived here for 25 years, but I've only been here like 9 years or whatever it was. You can't tell me anything about him? He goes, no, listen, I got to write a eulogy about him. Can you do me a favor? Can you let me into his room, into his apartment? You stand with me. I'm not going to steal anything. I need to look around. I got to write a eulogy about him. He goes, yeah, sure. So I go over and I say, come with me, stand by you. Here's his mail. I want to go through it. Just look at his mail. And I explain. If he gets a receipt from the Audubon Society, he was worried about the birds. The Humane Society, he was worried about dogs. I'm looking through his mail. It's all junk mail. So I go, no books, no magazines, nada. You know, like, oh my God, what am I going to say about this guy? Oh, you know what, Rabbi? His friend is next door. His next door neighbor is his friend. So I go and I knock on the door and I go, hi, I'm Rabbi Perlson. I have to do a eulogy for this guy. What can you tell me about him? He goes, oh, he was very quiet. What else? Well, honestly, Rabbi, I really didn't know him. Every morning I would knock on his door, he'd give me his garbage and I'd take it down. And then he would leave me a note of the groceries he wanted at Publix and I would, you know, buy his groceries for him and he'd give me a few bucks. Nothing about him? So I go, no. Get to the funeral, gravesite. He wasn't indigent. Everything was prepaid, but here's the most important thing. Nobody was there. It was me and one of the Blacksburgs. So what good is it to live to the age of 95 if you have absolutely nothing to show for it? And the similar story is, I think it was Woodrow Wilson was president of Princeton, I think. President Woodrow Wilson. Before he was president, I think he was president, not of Yale, I think it was Princeton. And one day, one of the aides walks in and says, Mr. President, a colleague of yours died. I go, really? Which one? It says here that, you know, Professor so-and-so died. You know, he was 74 years old. He goes, died at 47, buried at 74. What was the joke? As soon as he got tenure, couldn't get fired, stopped doing anything, couldn't fire him. He died at 47, they just buried him at 74. That's what the president explained. So a lot of times, you know, you think, oh, the person died young, it was a Gilgal's reincarnation. Look, Western society has a major problem by evaluating a person by quantity instead of quality. Person died, yeah, $25 million in the bank. Oh, that's a success. Really? I'd be infinitely more impressed if he didn't have $25 million in the bank and he'd given it all to tzedakah. That would have impressed me. Not how much, you know, that saying, there's a bumper sticker. It's really disgusting. Haven't seen it for a while, but the bumper sticker was, in the end, the man with the most toys wins. Wrong, Goyish attitude. Stop thinking materialistically and quantitatively and think qualitatively. That's also a concept of Gilgal and what's important in your physical life, what's important in the time that we are granted. Go for the gusto. Yeah, you know what that means? Go for the mitzvahs. How do you want to be remembered? How do you want to be remembered? As the guy who died with $25 million in the bank? I'd be more impressed if, like I said, if you took $5 million and you made a scholarship and sent Jewish kids to, you know, and every year, 20 kids went to a Jewish day school because of you. Okay, God willing, next week, I'm sorry I went 15 minutes over. Had a good group. We had close to 34 people. And God willing, tomorrow, oh, don't forget, Friday night, 6 o'clock in shul and Zoom, but only for 20 minutes because we have to Shabbat candlelighting at like 6:22. And then everyone in shul, Scotch bar, open bar, guys, open bar. Someone's bringing a 25-year-old bottle of Scotch. I might bring my bottle of Blue Label. I might.
Oh.
But you got to come. You got to be in shul. Oh, you know what? I'll pour you one over Zoom, you know, but I get to drink it. All right, guys. Lila Tov, have a good evening, everyone. I hope you enjoyed class.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank
have
you.
Thank
any
you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Laila
let
Tov.
me know.
Thank you.
If you have
May
any
the,
recommendations, any questions, email me, text me.
may
Thank
the
you.
force be with you.
There
Good
you
night.
go.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Or
Thanks,
better,
Rabbi.
For your question,
better
I
yet,
saw your question on the chat.
May Hashem be with
Where is
you.
he? Where did he go?
Of
Yeah,
course.
well, you know where they go? They go to the virgins. You asked about the Hamas souls. Where do they go?
Oh, who asked that?
Mr. Kurtzer,
Oh, where do they go?
Franklin. So I'm telling him they go to the virgins.
77 of them.
In actuality, no. There's actually a
No, of
special
course not.
madriga in Gehinnom, a special level of punishment for
Yeah.
people that
No,
learn.
of course I'm kidding, Rabbi.
Yeah.
I don't believe that. Okay.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Good night. I hope you enjoyed class.
And Mel
Excellent.
Brooks says, may the Schwartz be with you.
Merchandising. Okay, Lila Tov.